Hi, I'm John Townsend, and we're here today at historic Gunston Hall, home of George Mason, a forgotten founding father in American history, and we're right outside Washington, D.C. I've got with me Michael Twitty. He's a culinary historian.
How you doing?
I am doing very well, and we are going to be doing an okra soup. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about what you specialize in. What do you do?
So I am a food writer, I'm a culinary historian and historic interpreter, and I focus on the foodways of the enslaved from Africa to America, from slavery to freedom, from arrival to past Reconstruction.
Okay.
So that's my worldview in terms of food. And not just one particular area, the Chesapeake, the Low Country, the Lower Mississippi Valley, the places in between, the roots in the Caribbean, in Brazil, and historic foodways in West Central Africa, and how those foodways have a collision with European Native American foodways to create the basis of what Southern cuisine as we know it is today.
And you're working on a book?
Yes, The Cooking Gene from HarperCollins, which traces my own family history through food.
So when is that going to be out?
August 2017.
Sounds great. So tell us a little bit about this okra soup we're going to be doing today.
So okra is a vegetable from tropical Africa.
Okay.
It's thousands of years old, and it's pretty much found all over the continent. It's spread to Southern Asia and China, and it traveled around the world partly because of the Portuguese slave trade. So okra has been around for quite a while, but for most Americans it's a southern vegetable. Associated with the arrival of Africans in response to the slave trade, particularly in the 17th and 18th centuries. It probably started, bounced from the Caribbean, then to the south, as opposed to directly coming over from Africa. What we know about okra is that at least by 1740s, whites and blacks in Philadelphia are growing this vegetable. We don't really have a good grip on how old in the American South, because it's, the seeds don't exactly last too long in the archaeobotanical record. But pretty much we're talking about okra has been here since before the Revolution.
And would they have generally cooked it in a soup like we're doing today?
Oh, absolutely. Deep fried okra comes much later, but okra soup is one of the foods that you could have found from Senegal to Angola. That's the entire length of the West African coast during the transatlantic slave trade. So for our purposes, okra can also be found in the Chesapeake, okra soup, in the Low Country, and also as gumbo in New Orleans. So all the major points of Southern food are touched upon by this one vegetable, just as okra would have been found among all the different kinds of peoples who came to the South during the time of the slave trade.
To start this recipe, we need to create a rich broth.
The broth takes a while to develop, and that's the real secret of this soup, is that it's not just throw everything in a pot and let it boil. In this case, a little bit of chicken broth, a little beef broth. But what you want to do is have that onion with the cloves in it. Have, any other things you want to put. You can put herbs in that stage. In my recipe, I tend to put the herbs in the last part because they're fresh. And I want that fresh burst at the end of the dish. Some beef tallow that we had, throw that in there. Any scraps. So what we want to do is just have all of those flavors stew down. The broth itself takes about an hour or two if you really want to have the full experience.
Now that the broth is developed, we're going to continue making our soup.
So what we're doing is we're going to flour the onions and garlic. We're going to fry up, and we're going to use a little bit of modern lard, aka partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, and a little bit of butter. However, people are scared of lard, and it's unfortunate because lard is natural. Lard is no less healthy or unhealthy for you than other things, and it would have been the typical fat used to fry things at that point, especially in the South. So we're going to use that little bit of butter to bring out the flavor, help it brown, but also create a base for the okra soup. So we're going to take some small okra, smallest okras we have. You want small okra because those are the ones that are going to be not so slimy.
So like you would want a summer squash when it's young and small, you want okra when it's young and small.
Exactly. But okra needs to be cut very thin, and the smaller the okra, the better to start with. And that's how it works. And also, you think about it, people think now, soup in the middle of the summer, well, a better way to stay hydrated in a time period when there was very little clean water, and the best way to have clean water was to boil it. I'm gonna go ahead and add the okra as well as the onions, and then it's gonna be followed by the tomatoes.
So tomatoes in the 18th and 19th century can be a tricky topic. Some different cultures thought of them as poisonous. What do you think?
It's because they're nightshades, and nightshades are technically poisonous plants. But you would die of overeating tomatoes before you actually die of eating tomatoes. Same thing for potatoes or peppers. But the interesting part of it is that African, Mediterranean, certainly Latin cultures at the time were all eating tomatoes frequently. In the colonial Chesapeake, we know, for example, that tomatoes were being grown like 1720s, 1730s, 1740s. You can buy them at market. People were eating tomatoes. And they certainly were widely distributed in West Africa, and certainly a part of West Central African cuisine long before the arrival of Africans in the South. So as I add the tomatoes to the pot, I'm also going to add some kosher salt, some kitchen pepper, some black pepper, and some herbs, consisting of sage, thyme, and rosemary. So just to give it a little bit more flavor, I'm adding a little bit of smoked protein, smoked meat to the pot, which is pretty typical for this dish. You can add just about anything you want, but in this case, we're adding a little bit of smoked turkey. And last but not least, I'm adding a little bit of fresh parsley. And we're gonna cook that down for about an hour, and then we're gonna have a lovely pot of okra soup served on top of cooked rice.
Wonderful.
For a lot of black interpreters, they love to be, part of various units representing the soldiers during the Civil War. And that is beautiful, and that's heroic, and that's wonderful. But as I often joke, a lot of people want to play glory. Nobody wants to play roots. And, it's tough. But both of those stories need to be told. The stories of free people of color and stories of black Civil War soldiers and abolitionists, but also the everyday people who made up the bulk of the black population. People who had lived for generations in bondage and were hoping for their freedom. And so I see it as my own personal mission to enter their world by doing the tasks, by being an enslaved cook.
Wonderful flavors. The okra, it goes right along with it. I mean, it's not like it's got a flavor of its own, but it blends right in there with everything else.
Okra dances with other vegetables, especially tomatoes and corn and rice.
Right.
Very
So
interesting.
this has got some just amazing flavors in it.
The kitchen pepper actually makes it, I think.
I think so. Yeah. Wow. Excellent. And little bits of meat in there.
Yeah. And different colors. I mean, it's a very colorful sort of dish. It's not monochromatic.
Wow. I've been missing out on okra all this time.
Yeah, you need more okra in your life.
Thank you so much for bringing us this wonderful okra soup. The taste is wonderful. If you've missed out on okra like I have, give this a try. This one is a wonderful recipe. You really need to try it. So thank you so much for bringing this.
Thank you, sir.
And I want to thank everyone for coming along with us, trying this out along with us, savoring the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. I want to thank everyone there at Gunston Hall for their wonderful help with this series. If you're interested in Gunston Hall, make sure to check out their website.